Good afternoon. We just wanted to see if everyone could hear us. Are you able to use the chat box on the left-hand side just to indicate whether you can hear us, please? Wonderful. And you can all see the holding slide on the screen. Wonderful. Welcome to the first Queensland Architecture Awards webinar. I'm Courtney. I am the Queensland Awards and Events Coordinator, and I am joined today by John Tong from Wilson Architects and Paul Worroll from Red Dog Architects, who are both experts for today's topics. Welcome, Paul and John.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
We wanted to start with a brief overview of the awards program, and please do feel free to use the chat box on the left to ask any questions as we go. The awards is a national program aimed at promoting the profession. Whilst each awards program ties into the national policy, there are elements that make each program unique. In Queensland, this is the addition of the regional tier and the fact that all entries are visited. The regions in Queensland are the Gold Coast, Brisbane, Darling Downs, West Moreton, covering Ipswich, Toowoomba and out west, the Sunshine Coast, Central Queensland, covering Bundaberg to Mackay, North Queensland being Townsville, and Far North Queensland being Cairns. It is important to remember that when submitting an entry, it should be entered into the region where the project is entered, not the practice. Queensland entries open mid-November and close the final business day in January. Regional judging, being the jury visits, commence in late February each year and will continue through to mid-March. Those successful at the regional level, being a regional commendation, will form the shortlist for state, which will be announced in late March. The regional jury are also able to award a building and/or house of the year, which would be presented at either a shortlisting event or at the state awards. At this point, I would suggest that you familiarise yourself with our Queensland Awards website, as all of the relevant dates for our program are listed prior to entries opening. Once the shortlist is announced, the state jury will begin their jury tour in April, visiting all projects that have been shortlisted. Results are then announced at a dedicated event in June, and again, all dates are published on the Queensland Awards website prior to opening. Following the state awards, entries that receive a state award or the highest honour in each category, being a named award, are then considered equally at the national level. The jury will conduct their tours between July and August each year, and unlike Queensland, not all entries are visited. And then the shortlist would be announced through media in either August or September. Results for the national level are announced at another dedicated event, which typically falls on the first Thursday in November and does move around the country each year. At this point, I'd like to hand over to Paul and John to touch on a couple of the elements that jurors will be looking for in your entry.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. On this particular slide, bear in mind when you're actually putting your submissions together that architects obviously review the descriptions in your project text and submissions, but also general public and lay people. In particular, under the submission, under the promotional summary text box, please review and think about conveying and communicating your projects to a layperson, because sometimes that differs how you actually portray your projects. And it's often good to have someone independent from yourselves just to overlook that and review your text, because often they interpret how we communicate projects differently, just to make sure it's clear and concise and is easily understood by non-architectural people.
And I think the same could also be said for the photographs. I mean, as much as the jury and the architectural community have the pleasure of seeing your photographs, you do a board, and if that board is in a public space, then you're obviously promoting to the general public as well. So be cognizant of the importance of that photo probably being understood by the public, obviously, as well as the architectural community.
Within the submissions, there's also a project description text box, and that's where I guess you are more so communicating to the architectural fraternity. So in that area of the submissions, you can be more descriptive architecturally about your ideas, your architectural components of the project, and they'll appreciate that as well. Photography is becoming more and more important, always has been for our submissions, but it's very important, I guess, for you to have good photography that represents your projects clearly and very well to the juries. And whilst in Queensland all the projects are visited, either regionally or by state juries, or both, just bear in mind that when they do advance further down the track in the awards program to, say, national level, their first impressions are the photographs in particular of the projects. So it's important then that your photography represents your project well and leaves that strong first impression for the juries in general. The photographs can also include before and after images. They're more so particular to relevant categories like alts and additions or the heritage categories, whereby photographs before the work and then photographs after the work communicate a greater sense of the project. And also bear in mind when you're submitting multiple categories or photographs particular to a category, you may submit different photographs for differing categories. For instance, if you're submitting in the public category and also an interiors category, the types of photographs that are submitted should be relevant to the category you're submitting for.
I think it's also important with the photography and the images as well that I think there is actually a subheading for the submission which is to do with context. So I think it's actually quite important as well that when you do get photography taken, that you actually do consider the building design within its context when you take those photographs. So maybe if you avoid just always probably isolating your building from its surrounding context, because I think that's an important part of the story. And I think if you refer to the National Architecture Awards Entry Handbook, page 11 to be specific, it's quite clear about what photographs are needed as part of your submission.
These pages simply portray a couple of projects that came through this year's awards, and which were a particularly good example of photographs that represented the categories that they were submitted for, also the context that Paul was talking about.
So this particular project is interesting because it was submitted for a number of categories. So obviously the architects thought about that. It was submitted for urban design and also for multi-residential. So they made sure that they tried to cover all those categories when they were actually taking the photographs, and also, you know, they're very good photographs as well, as you can probably see.
Another example from this year's awards, beautiful photographs that represented the project well. I would add a comment that it is actually nice to see people using and occupying the buildings and the architecture and the spaces involved. I know when we did go and visit this project up at Curra in the Sunshine Coast, the building was filled with people, and they were all actively using the building, and the building came to life to some extent. And it's nice if you can, and if you have the time, to take the photographs post-occupation of the building and in use. It adds another dimension to the photographs. As described before, it's useful to have some before and after photographs that portray how the building evolved from when it was pre-work and post-work after the completion of the project completion. So this series portrays similar views and the work done on the project, and outlines quite clearly through the photographs the work that was completed.
So this project was actually submitted in the heritage category. So to see what the building looked like before the work was completed is actually very important for that particular category, and it helps to tell a story as opposed to maybe just seeing the finished photographs and then trying to have to interpret it without that information. So the entrants were, I suppose, commended for their ability to tell the full story with these photographs.
For ideas, I guess architecture is all about an idea that comes to mind, and I think we'd encourage you wholeheartedly in your submissions to actually think about your core ideas and then communicate them as part of your submissions. Think about your concepts, how they were realised through the project, and sort of describe how they actually came to being through the more memorable aspects of your architecture.
I think it's avoid concentrating on just the pragmatics or the functionality of the project, because I think that whilst that information is important, the jury actually are reasonably experienced in probably knowing the planning of a building or knowing how a building will work or operate. So the jury is very interested to understand the narrative or the story that underpins the whole project. And I suppose what we're going to talk about now is maybe how you might choose to communicate or illustrate that.
These are some examples from the award submissions over the years. I think diagrams and conceptual diagrams actually communicate quite simply and very effectively to a jury the ideas that you're trying to encapsulate in your projects. They don't have a lot of text that needs to be absorbed or a lot of reading, but they're actually quite concise and clear and visually quite effective in really what are the core ideas pertaining to the project.
So sometimes this information is more beneficial than just multiple floor plans or multiple elevations of a building. I think, again, just understanding the conceptual ideas behind the building is a very important core criteria of the awards program that needs to be considered. And in this case, the entrant decided to communicate it with a number of diagrams that told so much more about how the project evolved than just how it ended up.
Here's another example of what was submitted for the awards. Think about communicating to the juries just your thoughts behind the ideas, what informed them, what captured your imagination about the project and the site and its context and its place. and then how that related to what was realised. It really forms the narrative of your projects. Putting this ideas sheet together and concept ideas actually helps ourselves as architects also once we come to presenting the project to the juries on site. I would like to thank the past two architectural sheets and ideas, conceptual sheets that were submitted and the architects involved for allowing us to put this onto this presentation, because I think they're really informative for how you should think about submitting your future projects.
John, we've just had a question of where this style of presentation would be used in the submission.
I think there's provision in the submissions to put in attachments. So often they're, the plain drawings, the sections, elevations, and drawings and photographs. But please put them in as an attachment. Call it a concept sheet or an idea sheet, and simply attach it as part of the submission. The additional categories in the awards are the Sustainable Architecture Award, the Colorbond Award for Steel Architecture, and Enduring Architecture. So the Sustainable Architecture Award would be good in your projects to actually clearly describe and list out your sustainability approaches to the project, but not just in the section for sustainable architecture, but weave that through your project descriptions where it's relevant, because I'm sure a lot of sustainability initiatives inform your actual project outcomes to a point where they're quite fundamental to your project. So it's good to have that level of information in your project descriptions and not just left to the end there for the sustainability description.
I think it's important to note that those three categories are not considered at regional level at the moment. They are state level categories. So what's important about these is that very often or not, the state jury will need to see supporting information. So we need to promote to our regional jurors that they maybe ask questions about these particular elements. We are going to try and include this year a sustainability checklist, which will be part of the entry platform. That'll identify headings that you may want to address under the sustainability criteria. So it's more of a prompt about providing additional information, as John mentioned. And I suppose this particular category is sometimes whereby more detail is better than less. And the additional information that you'll be prompted for might be to do with things to do with siting, energy use, material selections, ecological issues or social issues that relate to the design, the construction and also the building use. So we'd really like to up the ante on the sustainability category and try and encourage architects to make submissions that maybe show where architects have maybe gone above and beyond what is status quo and attempted to achieve a great outcome from a sustainability point of view. So this is an image of the project that actually won the state award this year, and the amount of information they provided was exemplary, and they considered a lot of things, and it was in a very sort of sensitive site, and again we appreciate the fact that they've allowed us to use their photographs to illustrate the particular project.
The Colorbond Award for Steel Architectures for projects which exemplify innovation and the use of steel products. And it's important to note this is for the BlueScope steel products, and that includes Colorbond material. So whilst steel is a lot broader than just Colorbond material usage, we encourage you to put in material and information about the use of steel. In particular, I guess it's important to note that it's a BlueScope product, and entrants need to submit evidence that it was a BlueScope product used in their projects. The photograph of this year's project that won the BlueScope award. Vast amounts of steel, no doubt, but quite beautiful nonetheless. The Enduring Architecture Awards given to buildings of outstanding merit that have more or less stood the test of time. A lot of it conjures up memories of mid-century and 20th century architecture, and it doesn't necessarily need to be a project that you're even involved with. It may be projects that you've come across or admire the way that they have represented architecture over many, many years. And we encourage you to submit information about those projects. Courtney usually emails out through the awards program just little prompts for entries for the Enduring Architecture Award, and they're added to a master list which has been compiled over a number of years now, and even though it may not be successful in the year you submitted, it actually remains on that list for future consideration in the future years.
So sometimes these, I mean, obviously we're not expecting people to submit necessarily their own projects. I mean, there are architects out there that would maybe consider that they've got a project that's 25 years or more in age that would be worthy of submission. But again, there might be, if a project's put forward, there may then be the need to talk to other architects that may have background in that particular project, and we may try to dig a little bit deeper as to the enduring qualities of that particular building. So I suppose it's also about recognising buildings that maybe people don't know about. So I think this particular category is particularly relevant in the regions because there are a lot of great examples in the regions. I don't think they're probably recognised as much as they should be.
And speaking of their regions, this one was this year's Enduring Architecture Award. It's up in Townsville, Courts of Law, and as Paul was saying, it's not fully known outside of Townsville. I guess the residents in that region would know it quite well, but outside of that region, it's nice to know that these buildings are out there and form an enduring piece of the architecture in the local regions. This is almost to the end now, but look, in putting together your submissions, I'd encourage you just to prepare for the submission in advance rather than leaving it to the last minute. I know we as a practice sometimes fall into that trap because of time and you're rushed towards the end, but often it's much better if you just leave yourself a few extra days or a number of weeks just to plan it out and put your submissions together. Be clear and concise in your descriptions, and as we mentioned before, it's communicating to lay people as much as other architects, and be specific in regard to the text so that it's tailored towards the category that you're entering. For example, again, if it's an interiors project, you might, or you will hopefully, describe more so the interior aspects of the project rather than the project as a whole.
I think also, just in regards to the maybe entering a project in the correct category or even multiple categories, the Institute is available to answer questions about people putting submissions in before they submit. We do get the occasional few projects every year whereby we have to recategorise them because they are then considered to be in a different category. So if you're unsure, the Institute is open to being asked that question. The Institute will probably then direct the question to the jurors or the state jury. So again, feel free to probably talk about that before you actually make the submission, because it is important, again, that even the regional juries understand which particular category your project's being considered for. And I think the other thing too is, as John's saying, is probably check, double check, triple check your submission, and make sure you consider the wording of your project in terms of how it's then going to be, or who it's going to then be promoted to. And obviously we mentioned very early in the piece, you'll be promoting not only to the architectural community, your peers, but you'll also be presenting to the general public. So it's important to manage those two different fields that you're talking to.
Right, and this is the final slide. Yes. All of the jurors in the regions travel throughout their region. So we'd encourage you, if you're not submitting an award, to actually put your hand up and become a juror in any of the regions that you happen to be in. It's a fantastic experience, and without question, the feedback at the end of the process by anyone who has done it in the past is that they absolutely love it.
I think what's important is maybe a little bit of the camaraderie, as well as maybe getting to see architecture that you probably may never see again, because very often or not, some of the places that you visit are sort of back of house areas, or they might be people's houses, and very often or not, they're never open to the public. So there's a certain sort of degree of enjoyment about maybe seeing something that not many people will see. And I will say that there is a big difference between seeing something in the flesh and seeing something, as a photo. And very often or not, when you look through architectural magazines and then you actually do go off and maybe see those buildings in the flesh, you quickly realise either the beauty or the scale of those projects a lot more than you would if you just view them in photographs. So I think that's a big bonus about maybe becoming a juror and being part of a touring group.
And you also get CPD points. So,
yes.
So that's all, and thank you for your time, and good luck with your submissions.
Given that this is a rare opportunity to have both John and Paul, are there any questions that we haven't answered in this presentation that you would like for submitting?
Whilst you're thinking of a question, whilst we're on that slide, an opportunity to become a juror actually puts you in a position to take on board all the information we've just spoken about how you put your submissions together. So if you haven't got a project that you're putting in one year and you do become a juror, you actually get to see and interpret all the information that comes through for yourself. And that does help inform and prepare you for the next time you put a submission in for the awards.
And as Paul touched on earlier, if there are any questions when you're submitting, you are more than welcome to contact the Queensland chapter. You can contact me directly. My phone number is 38284106. I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you may have. We will also mention that there will be a second webinar coming out next February. This will be aimed at what to do whilst on a jury visit. So once you've completed your entry, what are some of the do's and don'ts around what to do when the jury are on site. If there's no further questions, we may end it there.
I was just going to add one thing as well. Just so people know that when a jury actually comes around to actually visit your project, and I know that's there's going to be a slightly different webinar about visitations, but I think what we're trying to do here is obviously not only sort of give a bit of a background or give advice on maybe how to make a submission, but I think we're also probably just also trying to encourage people to enter awards as well, because the jury does come out and remains very positive. Every architect who puts a project in for the awards program obviously considers themselves that project to be worthy. So it's actually a very positive feeling, probably even having a jury come and visit your project and and to be able to present. So again, apart from suggesting you become a juror, I really would encourage you also to make submissions to the actual awards program as well. Thank you.
We don't appear to have any other final questions, so I did want to take the opportunity to thank both Paul and John for your help in preparing and delivering the webinar. And we look forward to seeing you all for the next one in February. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.